Restoring men and history. Important today. Restore the Constitution. And of course, to restore the Constitution, we need what? You men. So it's also restoring men today. And a lot of actually important court cases happened last week. We're going to go over one that was very disappointing that we had been following. Free speech, freedom, they go together. Court case finished up last week that we had been following. Murphy versus Missouri, big case, huge implications to how you speak and to whom you speak to and how you speak. Freedom of speech. What are some of the reasons this is important? Your freedom, your ability to say what you need to and what you want to everyone, not being censored by federal agencies or the federal government, is important to the republic. Without agencies and government entities telling social media whom to censor, what to censor, and you have to comply with this narrative and this super narrative, right? Because that has been going on. Who you're sharing with, who's seeing, right? Driven from the federal government. Again, this is not about what private companies do. It's about the government coercing them to do things. Government saying you can't post this. Oh, this is that, right? The federal government. Because remember the First Amendment. Who's it restraining? The First Amendment's restraining the federal government. Now, I happened to catch this. Tucker was in Australia, great speech. We'll come back to it and do more of the speech. But this clip, he talks about how important free speech is, and we believe it is so important to a republic. So let's watch Tucker.
How is a leader's job not to prioritize his own people? Of course it is. No one can make a rational argument against that, so they don't. They attack anybody who raises questions about it. And in the rest of those other countries, including mine, they're starting to criminalize complaining about it. In other words, this is a great thing, and if you say otherwise, we'll put you in jail. And they're planning to do that here, in case you don't know. They've absolutely done that in Canada. In the UK, they put a lot of people in prison for complaining about it. Hey, I don't think you're taking care of the people who are born here. Shut up, racist, you're going to jail. Actually, every week people go to jail for that. Imagine that. Imagine that. And imagine the mindset that allows that. If you are telling people, human beings, adult citizens, that they don't have a right to express what they believe, what are you saying? Well, what you're saying is, I don't think you're human. Because the right to say what you think pre-exists government. It's something that you're born with as a human being. It's what distinguishes you from animals and slaves. That's the core of your human autonomy, the right to say what you really believe, to express your conscience. And if you no longer possess that, you are not human anymore. You belong to someone else. You are an object. And so any leader who tells you, you don't have a right to say that, you don't have a right to criticize me or my policies, that person considers you subhuman. And that's a crime as far as I'm concerned. We shouldn't even have that. And by the way, in my country, we have an explicit law against that. It's the First Amendment to our Constitution, because ours is a revolutionary country. And so the framers of our founding documents were forced, under gunfire actually, to think this through. We're building a country from nothing. What do we want?
So that's Tucker Carlson stressing the importance of free speech, which we really promote here. By the way, if you like this message, please like, comment, subscribe, and hit that notification button. Free speech. You also need free speech for what? And it goes way beyond this, but you also need it for free elections. And a huge and enormous election is coming up right at the time this case has gone down. Murphy v. Missouri. Now, I read the opinions of Alito and Amy Coney Barrett, and then we're going to read an article from this, which goes over it pretty well. And we did an article on this. We have talked in earlier videos, you can go back to, about the right to how the First Amendment protects your friendship and sharing information. That's the right to friendship. We've talked about this case, Murphy versus Missouri, in a previous thing. So we're not going to go back through that. Loneliness, isolation, friendship. First Amendment all improves your ability to deal with loneliness. And what is a way to keep power-hungry governments in check? Free speech. What's a way to keep mass psychosis in check? Free speech. What's a way to keep federal and administrative agencies and administrative state in check? Free speech and free press. Now, if most of the press is compromised and working for the establishment and pushing the narrative for the government and directed by it and okay with it and in the tank, then independent media and your voice becomes that much more important, and the First Amendment becomes exceedingly important that the government is restrained, not you. See, the way the First Amendment works, it restrains the federal government, not you. The federal government's not supposed to be restraining you, working through private companies to tell them to restrain you in your speech and censor you. Censorship. Not supposed to be the federal government censoring you through private agencies because they're telling them and coercing them to do that. You better do this or you'll get in trouble. And if all the media is compromised, and you saw that debate last week, right? And what did it tell you? It's like my friend Rob said, and he texted me. It also showed you how awful and dishonest the media has been about Biden, right? Because he's the sharpest guy ever. Everybody's saying he's fantastic. He's fantastic. We could do a clip collage here, but I don't think we will. Of all the media saying he's fantastic. He's the sharpest I've ever seen him. He's so bright. He's so mentally acute. Blah, 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 blah. But they set that up, like Rob said. And so you saw another example of the media misleading you for their own purposes. And so if the media is gone, your voice becomes what? Incredibly important for your neighbors, your friends, and everyone else, for you to be able to get your information to other people and for you to be able to hear it from other people besides the super narrative media, the establishment media, which is telling you Biden's fantastic, the sharpest guy ever. He's the sharpest, brightest guy ever, right? Now, we're going to cut to this interaction with Tucker Carlson just recently, just the other day in Australia, to show you another example of a media, the reporter, they're in the tank, right? The establishment media. And what point am I making here? If the media is an establishment, if the media is just the establishment carrying the voice and carrying the narrative of the powers that be, your voice becomes all important. So if the media is all in and it's about you, what becomes so important? The First Amendment. Let's read it together. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press. We'll stop there. Abridging the freedom of speech or of the press. That's why your voice is so important. It's why it's so important for a republic. That, in theory, presents this administrative state. By the way, we could get into unconstitutionality here. And they're not even really directed by the executive branch. They're under it. But they went their own way in 2020, right? They were shutting down that Hunter Biden story. Biden wasn't in office, right? That in theory, that prevents the federal government from coming in and telling social media companies what they have to take down or what they have to put up or what stories they can't cover. Hunter Biden laptop, remember that? Had to be censored, had to be taken down. And people said it did affect their votes. So that was election interference, right? People said it would change their votes had they had that information. So it would have seemed to have changed the election. So in theory, that prevents the government from coercing, forcing, censoring through private companies, right? Which would shut down and silence you and censor you and shut down your voice. And your voice becomes so important because, right, the jabs are effective. The mask works so well and they protect you. There is no election fraud, right? All of these things that came up that the super narratives were pushed on and the media jumped into, which makes your voice so important. So if your voice gets out there, it might cost them election. It might cost them votes. It might cost them power. It might cost certain companies more money pushing certain things, right? Goes against their agenda. Shut it down. If it goes against the agenda, shut the people down, right? The industrial censorship complex, which we've talked about, should not be censoring you, according to the First Amendment. Stella Morabito at the Federalist said this before the ruling, and this is a good quote. We believe in this. This quote tells you what we've been talking about and believe. Murthy is ultimately about enabling an enormous censorship industrial complex to control individuals' conversations and, by extension, individuals' relationships, your relationships, all at the behest of whom? Government actors Scary, right? Dangerous. Any SCOTUS ruling in favor of the government would blow the door wide open to undermining the First Amendment's guarantee of free speech for hundreds of millions of individual Americans. Dangerous. We talked about how important the First Amendment was for friendship, camaraderie, for the Republic, for expressing yourself, for sharing information, for knowing what's going on. So let's never forget the Twitter files and never forget what the administrative state did and the agents did in censoring. Remember all the labels, the jabs, the masks, the information, the isolation they created. And let's cut to where Tucker talks about the health period now.
But the much more significant fact, I would say, is that the way Americans vote was changed completely using the pretext of COVID. And the idea was that Americans were so sick with this killer virus that emerged from a pangolin in a wet market. They were selling mammals in a seafood market for some reason in Wuhan. They were so incapacitated they couldn't actually make it to the polls. And so they needed to have their ballots anonymously picked up in these drop boxes without using voter ID. And had nothing to do with voter fraud at all. It was purely a medical response. Well, now COVID is, of course, still around. It hasn't gone anywhere. Once Fauci created it, it's going to be here forever. But we're not worried about COVID anymore for some reason. But the voting changes remain in place. And it's very clear to me that the point of them was to abet voter fraud, obviously. And I don't think that okay, that's fine, there's voter fraud around the world, but you can't simultaneously claim that you're here to defend democracy and abet voter fraud at the same time. Because voter fraud undermines democracy very obviously, more than anything else, right? If people can't trust election outcomes, you don't have a democracy. And Americans can. And I'm very distressed about it. And I don't really know, but there seems to be no appetite to do anything about it. I mean, one of the things, and I won't go on, it's the last thing I'll say, but the question of voter ID is not a question in most civilized countries. France, for example, you don't have an ID, you can't vote. I mean, because how do we know who you are? And we take elections seriously. Even in France, primitive, stinky France takes elections so much more seriously than we do. It's shameful to me as an American. And so, but we were told you can't do that because African Americans just don't have IDs. Really? Is there evidence for that? So in my country, you can't do anything without a government ID. You can't cash a check. You can't have a bank account. You can't buy a pack of cigarettes. You can't check into a hotel. You can't get on an airplane. You can't get on a Greyhound bus. You can't do anything without a government-issued ID.
So you remember how the doctors and everybody was censored and shut down, cut off. That's not America that we love. That's not the America we want. That's what the First Amendment should have protected against. Shouldn't have government actors telling what's to be censored and private companies what to do. And that's what we're talking about here. That's not what the ratifiers ratified. That's not what the founders fought for, right? Now, what great men fought for the Bill of Rights? And in that was the First Amendment. Patrick Henry, the great man. Richard Henry Lee. Sam Adams of Mass. And let's lay it out here. Without the First Amendment, you don't have America. No Bill of Rights, no Virginia. No Bill of Rights, no Mass. No Bill of Rights, no New York. Which means you don't have a country, right? Because Virginia and New York are the big two. You don't have Washington, you don't have Madison, you don't have Jefferson, you don't have Monroe. You don't have all those founders. Patrick Henry are all gone. They're in Virginia. So you don't have a country. And they fought for freedom of speech in the press. They thought it was important. And the Anti-Federalists predicted what would happen today, that the federal government would take power, keep taking power, add to their power, usurp the power of the states and keep adding, usurp the power of the individual and keep adding power. The Anti-Federalists were right in many ways. Now, in 1776, we just talked about it, they did the Declaration of Independence, but we have a written constitution, which means all we must do, ladies and gentlemen, is restore it. Difficult, but not impossible. And we have the piece of paper. So the question is, how do we get back to restoring freedom and restoring the freedom of speech and restoring the Constitution? That's the important thing. How do we do it? Patrick Henry said, this is the relinquishment of the trial by jury and the liberty of the press necessary for your liberty. Will the abandonment of your most sacred rights tend to the security of your liberty? And we could stay here all day now. Liberty, the greatest of all earthly blessings. Give us that precious jewel, and you may take everything else. Patrick Henry, ratification debates. How important he thought this was, and he was right. And it is, and now we must stand peacefully and lawfully for it. And we must share this with other people and get them to be fired up lawfully and peacefully for it. Pass it along, share it, get out of complacency. So we must bring back the spirit of liberty that they had at the time of Patrick. Notice how it says liberty, liberty, liberty. That's a spirit. We have to get it back here. It's up to us. Let's go a little bit to the piece. Free speech fight will go on after Supreme Court's devastating ruling. MD Kittle, thefederalist.com. Free speech may have taken a beating in the U.S. Supreme Court's ruling, giving big government and big tech free reign over the First Amendment. But an attorney for the private plaintiffs in the cease case says the battle is far from over. Quote, we are not giving up. We are pursuing it on the merits. Good for them. Keep going. In the district court, and we want to get more discovery. Yanin Yanez, litigation counsel for the New Civil Liberties Alliance. So, NCLA represents the private plaintiffs in the ruling that saw a 6-3 majority in Murphy v. Missouri. Where was Amy Coney Barrett on this one, by the way? Reverse a lower court's injunction that blocked the federal government from partnering with social media giants to silence posts it doesn't like. You are so important. You can't have government actors determining who posts where and how. As my colleague Sean Fleetwood wrote, the decision based on an absurd standing argument effectively frees the Biden administration to continue its censoring operations during the 2024 election. How about that? What about the timing here? We know what happened with the Hunter Biden laptop last time. We know it would have changed people's minds, and here it is again. This was a disappointing case. But ladies and gentlemen, we've got to decrease, and we'll get in another video about this, the size of government. We don't want to depend on the courts or Congress or the presidency. They're all too powerful. They're all too big, and that's the real discussion, right? We should come back and do what the real debate should have been, Kurt. Quote, the Supreme Court majority has practically erased the First Amendment and permitted government to co-opt private entities. This is what we don't want, ladies and gentlemen, like social media platforms to accomplish its censorship aims. NCLA said in a press release following the ruling. This is dangerous to your freedom, dangerous to you, dangerous to your family. This is not what the intention of the ratifiers was. They fought for this for you. They said no Bill of Rights, no First Amendment, no Virginia. So we got to get it back. In the majority opinion, Justice Amy Coney Barrett wrote that the plaintiffs failed to establish standing. This comes up often because they did not demonstrate a substantial risk that in the near future they will suffer an injury that is traceable to a government defendant and redressable by that injunction they seek. Again, the election's coming right up. Quote, because no plaintiff has carried that burden, none has standing to seek a preliminary injunction, the decision opines. But this piece goes on to say truth can get you fired today. But if the past is truly an indicator of the future, it's difficult to reconcile the standing argument with the speech suppression that occurred, particularly against those who rightly question the government's policy, all those health policies that came up, I don't know how to say it, and the voice legitimate concerns over the jabs. So you remember the narratives, the ears, the jabs, the mask, all that came up. People were censored, ivermectin, right? Remember it. Let's never forget that. It's crazy. NCLA's clients, doctors, well, you got a bunch of doctors written down here. Jill Hines, Aaron, Kierheide, Martin Koldorf, Janetta. So we're not going to go through all the names. We're all censored for daring to challenge the government's disinformation campaign on the health thing. Pandemic. It cost Koldorf his job as a respected professor at Harvard. Quote, I'm no longer a professor of medicine at Harvard. The Harvard motto is veritas, Latin for truth. But as I discovered, truth can get you fired, right? We know other people. This is my story, a story of a Harvard biostatistician and infectious disease epidemiologist clinging to the truth as the world lost its way during the health thing. Now, let's never forget the tyranny of the agencies and administrative state during that, and what they pushed out, and the narratives they pushed. Super narratives you could not challenge. Koldorf had questioned the lockdowns and the mandates, the jab mandates. The mask never made sense either, right? No one was hurt by the government. The majority opinion asserts that while big tech speech suppressors did have content moderation policies and may have been censoring users, the plaintiffs provided no documentation showing the government coerced the social media giants to do so. As Censor-in-Chief Joe Biden would say, that's malarkey. Yunus said the ruling is rooted in some factual errors by the majority of the Louisiana District Court judge who on July 4th, 2023, think about this, we just hit July 4th again, Independence, and we were so excited this opinion came out on Independence Day, right? We thought it was fantastic, July 4th, 2023. When this came out, we brought it to you because we think your voice is so important. And without freedom of speech, we don't have freedom. You can't cut it off. We've done many series, Cato's letters and everything on this. You cannot have a great republic without free speech, ladies and gentlemen. So we need to stand for it lawfully and peacefully, continually. The government said the executive branch, quote, seems to have assumed a similar role, and we loved this at the time, to an Orwellian ministry of truth. Right? We thought that was fantastic by that judge. We were excited. U.S. District Judge Terry Dowdy, we brought him up, conducted a thorough review of voluminous records showing dozens of agencies communicating with big tech companies, according to Eunice. There were probably close to 100 federal officials that we know of who were colluding with, coercing, pressuring, influencing the companies to effectuate their censorship desires, the attorney said, adding that the justices in the majority appear to have read the government's brief and just believed everything they said. And at this point, who would really believe the government on much of anything, right? Literally. In his dissent, Justice Samuel Alito, I read this opinion, warned that the government's conduct was blatantly unconstitutional. That First Amendment was written to restrain these agencies. These agencies shouldn't even be there, but anyway, to restrain the federal government, any agencies, Congress, the president, the Supreme Court, everybody, right? And the country may come to regret the court's failure to say so. We regret it today. And the ratifiers would be livid. Quote, officials who read today's decision together with Volo will get the message. If a coercive campaign is carried out with enough sophistication, it may get by. That is not a message this court should send. Difficult but not impossible. Why the high court remanded the case for the lower court for further proceedings consistent with his opinion, Eunice said expanded discovery might just stop the overreaching government yet. NCLA plans to go after government and big tech communications involving its clients to show the direct harm caused and demanded in the majority standing argument. Quote, the district court has shown that it believes in our case and said, and this was a great quote, we read this earlier months and months ago, this is arguably the most massive attack on free speech in the history of the United States, which I agree with, Eunice said. We agree. It's one of them, at least. It's one of them. It may not be the most massive, but it's one of them. The Alien and Sedition Act was horrendous. And there's been other times, but this is one of them. The federal government was censoring entire narratives, entire lines of thoughts. If you question the efficacy of the jabs in 21, even if you were an expert like our client Martin Kulldorff, you would be censored on social media as he was. And who made money on that particular thing? The case may also get an assist from our RFK. It goes into that. So I think we'll skip that. Kennedy has a lot of emails showing the Biden administration trying to silence his speech. RFK Jr., who was blocked from social media as part of what the government and corporate media have described as the disinformation dozen for challenging the government's faulty narrative on the jab. The digital director for the White House response team wrote in an email to an official at Twitter, the health, response team, wrote in an email to an official at Twitter, the publication reported. Alito also dissented in the court's rejection of Kennedy's motion to join the lawsuit, suggesting standing could be a problem and RFK Jr. could help take that argument away. Look at that. So they rejected Kennedy being on it, which Alito says would have given them the standing for sure they needed, or help get the standing. Supreme Court is making it very difficult to bring the case, but we're not making it impossible. But they're not making it impossible, Uni said. If the Supreme Court won't stand up to the first assault, Jill Hines, NCLA director, said, after reviewing the shocking and incriminating evidence indicating a massive government censorship scheme, the justices erroneously determined to allow the government access to social media companies for the purpose of undermining free speech, she said in the press release. Now, she asked here Congress to act. We hope they would, but you've got that uniparty going on in Congress, right? And some of both parties like censorship for different reasons. So this is going to be up to you, really, of putting the right people in it. It's a demanding and difficult task, but not impossible. So she says Congress must act immediately to defund agencies and third parties. So they could do that if they had the will and they had the want. This broadly pervasive and unconstitutional censorship scheme. So disappointed it didn't discipline or punish the federal government, right? And we had seen the Twitter files and other things. So seemingly bad here. The anti-federalists predicted the federal government would get out of control, and it is out of control. Anti-federalists also called Republicans at the time, right? Sometimes. Now, it's going to be up to you getting information out, sharing it, and devising lawful and peaceful ways to restore the First Amendment and restore the Constitution. Because right now we've got people on both sides of the aisle, the uniparty, that want censorship for different reasons. And of course, the courts, we can't count on them always. And really, the federal government shouldn't be this. That's the real problem here, is the federal government is just too big and too powerful. That's the real issue. All these things shouldn't be going to the courts. They shouldn't be happening. They seem to be just breaking willfully the First Amendment, which was meant to restrain them. That's a problem. There was a time in 1776 where they had to take action. You have a constitution, though, so you can do everything lawfully and peacefully to restore the Constitution because you have that document and you have the First Amendment. So what can you do today and tomorrow? Everybody you meet, talk about how important and why the First Amendment. It's something you can do. It's an action you can take every day. Bringing more people to be upset and not complacent and restore the First Amendment and Constitution. That's what we're about here. Restore the Constitution. Restore men. Restore history. You can do it. Thank you. If you like our message, please like, comment, subscribe, and hit that notification button.